The town of Silent Hollow was cloaked in an eerie stillness. Buildings stood abandoned, their vacant windows watching like the eyes of ghosts. A thick fog rolled in from the nearby lake, swallowing the remnants of the day. The only sound was the crunch of Daniel's boots on the cracked asphalt. Each step echoed in the silence, amplifying his loneliness. He clutched a flickering lantern, its weak light only penetrating a few feet ahead, the shadows dancing and twisting at the edge of its reach. Daniel had always hated this town. It was here, amidst the crumbling facades and whispering weeds, that he'd lost his brother, swallowed whole by the dense woods bordering the town. This time, it was his friend Mark, who had vanished. The wind picked up, swirling the fog into ghostly apparitions. It carried the scent of damp earth and something else, something ancient and cold that sent a shiver down Daniel's spine. He could have sworn he heard a voice, a mournful wail carried on the breeze, but when he turned towards it, there was nothing but the swirling mist. His heart pounded against his ribs. He told himself it was just the wind, playing tricks on his frayed nerves, but deep down a primal fear stirred within him, a fear that whispered of unseen things lurking in the fog. He remembered the stories the townsfolk used to tell, hushed whispers of Lost Lake, a place where souls were trapped, their cries echoing through the mist. He had dismissed them as folklore. But now, shrouded in the oppressive atmosphere of Silent Hollow, they seemed terrifyingly real. He couldn't fail again, not this time. Daniel reached the edge of the woods, the trees looming like gnarled giants, their branches intertwined, choking out the last vestiges of light. The path, barely visible even in daylight, was swallowed by a carpet of dead leaves and tangled undergrowth. He hesitated for a moment, the silence of the forest pressing in on him, but the thought of Mark, lost and alone in this desolate place, spurred him forward. He pushed through the undergrowth, branches clawing at his clothes, his boots sinking into the soft, damp earth. The further he ventured into the woods, the denser the fog became. He strained his ears, listening for any sign of Mark, but there was only an unsettling silence. The path, barely discernible to begin with, vanished entirely. Daniel stumbled through the undergrowth, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The fog played tricks on his eyes, transforming shadows into lurking figures, whispers of the wind into anguished cries for help. He tripped over a gnarled tree root, the lantern tumbling from his grasp. He scrambled for it, his heart leaping into his throat as darkness descended. The flame sputtered and died, plunging him into an abyss of absolute blackness. Panic welled up inside him, threatening to consume him. He couldn't give in to fear. He had to find Mark. His eyes slowly adjusted to the darkness, the faint glow of the moon filtering through the canopy, painting the woods in shades of grey. He rose to his feet, his hand shaking as he reached into his pocket for his lighter. The flick and hiss of the lighter was the only sound in the stillness as a small flame flickered to life, offering a meagre beacon in the oppressive darkness. He continued on, guided only by instinct and the faint hope that he was heading in the right direction. He recalled the whispers he had overheard as a child, tales of Lost Lake, a place of sorrow and despair where the souls of the drowned were forever trapped. The legend claimed that the lake was cursed, its waters reflecting not the moon and stars, but the faces of those it had claimed. Daniel shuddered, pushing the disturbing images from his mind. Yet as he stumbled through the dark and silent woods, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was being watched. After what felt like an eternity, he noticed a faint glow in the distance. It flickered between the trees, like a beacon in the darkness. Hope surged through him, urging him forward. As he drew closer, the glow grew stronger, illuminating the fog with an eerie, ethereal light. He emerged from the trees, his heart pounding in his chest. Before him lay Lost Lake, its surface as smooth as glass, reflecting the moon like a giant watchful eye. The source of the light was a lantern, identical to his own, resting on a moss-covered log at the edge of the water. He approached cautiously, his hand hovering over the hunting knife strapped to his belt. The silence was unnerving, broken only by the gentle lapping of water against the shore. He scanned the area, searching for any sign of Mark, but there was nothing but the lantern and the oppressive stillness. Daniel picked up the lantern, his hand trembling. A wave of dizziness washed over him as he stared at the inscription. Mark had been here. He had touched this lantern. But where was he now? A twig snapped behind him. He spun around, his heart leaping into his throat, the lantern held high. The beam of light danced across the trees, but there was nothing there, just the relentless fog and the unsettling silence. He was being paranoid, he told himself, but deep down a primal fear gnawed at his insides. He was not alone. He could feel it now, a presence lurking just beyond the reach of the light, watching him, waiting. And then he heard it. A low moan, mournful and filled with despair, echoing across the water. It was coming from the center of the lake, the sound seeming to seep from the depths itself. He froze, his blood turning to ice. It couldn't be. It was just the wind, he told himself. Just the wind and his imagination. But then the surface of the lake rippled. A pair of luminous eyes broke the surface, staring at him with a hunger that chilled him to the bone. He stumbled back, his foot catching on a root. He fell to the ground, the lantern tumbling from his grasp, its light extinguished in the damp grass. He scrambled back, his heart pounding against his ribs, his breath catching in his throat. The eyes blinked slowly, their gaze never leaving him, never. Daniel watched in horror as the woman drifted towards him, her movements slow and deliberate, like a sleepwalker drawn to an unseen force. He scrambled back, his hand frantically searching for the hunting knife at his side. His fingers closed around the cold steel, offering a sliver of comfort in the face of the unimaginable. The woman stopped a few feet away, her head tilted at an unnatural angle, her gaze still fixed on some distant point beyond him. He could hear her now, a low, mournful keening that sent shivers down his spine. "Mark!" he whispered, his voice hoarse with fear. "Is that you?" The woman's head snapped towards him, her vacant eyes suddenly burning with a cold, malevolent light. A low growl rumbled in her chest, a sound that seemed to emanate from the depths of her being. The woman let out an ear-splitting shriek, a sound filled with rage and agony. She stumbled back, clutching at her chest, her eyes wide with shock and disbelief. Then, as quickly as she had appeared, she dissolved into the mist, her cries echoing in the stillness. Long after she was gone, Daniel stood there for a moment, his chest heaving, the hunting knife clattering to the ground. The silence was deafening. The fog swirled around him, as if trying to conceal the horrors it had unleashed. He never found Mark. The authorities dismissed his disappearance as another tragic accident, another soul claimed by the unforgiving wilderness.